Hi, everybody. This is Bob Phillips, and I'm here from Alfred Publishing, where um, I am a composer and author and frequent clinician for Alfred. I used to be the string editor, and during my time as string editor, I was very privileged to be able to get to know and select music from our guest today, the amazing Katie O'Hara LaBrie. Katie is a fantastic conductor, teacher, composer, and cellist from Northern Virginia. In fact, all of her current publications have been honored as J.W. Pepper's Editor's Choice during her publication years. Katie, thanks so much for joining us today. Great to have you.
Thanks, Bob. This is really nice to see you on Zoom.
So, we have some questions for you that we think people will find very interesting. One of my favorite questions, I often get asked this, and I often ask other people, is so, who is your most influential music teacher, and more importantly, why? What did they do that made them so influential? How did it alter your musical life or your life in general?
I would say that would be my parents. My parents are both musicians to some degree. My dad is a wonderful guitar player, and my mom's a singer. In fact, that's how they met, singing and playing music together. And so growing up, what was really neat was that I had my classical training in my private lessons and at school in the orchestra. I learned how to read music, but then at home, I was listening to the Beatles and the Grateful Dead. My dad would play guitar and say, play along, and I'd pick up my cello and just have to figure it out. So having that kind of dichotomy of those two different styles, the more strict classical style, and then the playing by ear, really, I think made me grow as a musician.
Well, that's really interesting. That mirrors my growing up very much too, and certainly my daughters. What did living the living in both worlds thing is really interesting, isn't it? So
Mm-hmm.
what came out of that, do you think, in terms of how did that affect your music teaching? The fact that you were comfortable playing pop music, playing fiddle music or whatever kind of alternative styles that you were into, how did that affect your teaching?
I think in a myriad of ways. I think in that I do try to make sure throughout the year as a teacher, I'm giving students different types of experiences, whether it's through literature. We generally will do a pops concert in the spring and that sort of thing, mixed in with classical repertoire and educational repertoire. But also just how I approach the lessons. Like if we're learning a certain finger pattern, there was one, I think it's the high three, finger pattern that worked really well a few years ago with the song Rachel Platten. Uh, oh, this is my fight song, which everyone loved. And so we would just play that, and I'd have the kids play it by ear. We didn't need music to do that. And so that's developing their ear skills through a different venue than, say, the method book or things like that.
Yeah, I think that um, the way you have approached that is certainly a 21st century model for music teaching and where we're headed. I think that's a really important thing to point out to people. So, what is one of your most prominent memories from your school music program? How did it affect you? What was your experience like, and what did it motivate you to do or not to do?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple. I would say that I have a very vivid memory of being in seventh grade. We were a pretty big arts school, and we were doing the sound of music. I was in the pit orchestra, and the conductor, our teacher, was late, and so I got to get up there and lead the pit orchestra. And so it was like that moment that I decided that I wanted to be a music educator, not just a musician or a composer, but a music educator. So I think that was a big piece. There were definitely moments in high school and college where there's that one piece that you played that really propelled you or really fed your soul. I remember my first experience playing with the St. Olaf Orchestra where I went to college. We started with Barber's second essay, and there's kind of this chorale part, and that was the very first thing we ever played in orchestra that year, and it brought this 94 people together, and I think that was just such a magical experience, even in a rehearsal.
So would you say that then, at least what I think I'm hearing you say is that it was the active, affective part of um, music education that really kind of grabbed you, the part that touched your soul and made motivated you to want to continue and be a teacher. That was the part that really kind of got to you.
Yeah, bringing people together for sure. And then I would say that the third thing too is just the experience of being around my high school orchestra director, Beth McCollum. She um, was just very, I mean, in addition to being a wonderful teacher, she was just someone we all wanted to be around. We hung out at lunch, we would come after school, before school. That sort of environment, I think, is so special in the music world. And if I can create that for other students, I'd say that's a special time.
Oh, that's a great legacy for her. So, as a composer, um, I was talking to Chris Bernitas the other day, the current editor, and we were talking about the fact that educational composers have a wide variety of backgrounds in terms of preparation to be an educational composer. Um, and so in some cases, it's people that have taken a lot of composition classes, and in many cases, not any composition classes. Maybe have a lot of public school experience, maybe don't. But given all that, what is your process? How do you start composing a piece, and sort of what's your process in composing, and how does either your training inform you or not inform you, or perhaps your experience, with students?
Mm-hmm. So it has varied. Every piece kind of comes from somewhere, obviously. Um, from an educational standpoint, a lot of my pieces come from the needs of my students. I was, a few years ago working with my intermediate cellists on extensions. At the same time, I was looking at my winter program and said, you know what, I'd really like to add a Hanukkah tune in there. But there wasn't one that fit what the techniques were that they needed. So I came up with Hanukkah dances that had the technical aspects of what they needed and also the programmatic stuff that we were looking for. So sometimes it's something like that. I found inspiration in a lot of places. Sky Suite was composed in my head driving down a road, and I turned a corner and there was this beautiful sky that just opened up, and it reminded me of a friend, and it just kind of went from there. I went home and just jotted down that first thing. You'll often find me also with my iPhone, and I hit the voice recorder memo app, and we'll be in the car, and all of a sudden something will come to me, just an idea, and I'll jot it down audio, and then come home and try to take that and extract that into a piece.
So in terms of the process part, do you start with pencil and paper, or do you go straight to the computer? Sit at the piano, use your cello. How do you like to write?
I often start at the piano, which has its ups and downs, because sometimes all
Hmm.
of a sudden it's more of a piano line, and I'm like, oh, that's not something me as a cellist would do. So I often start there. As I then construct the piece, I have instruments all around, and it's really good to try them out to see what's going to be um, playable by the kids at that level. Is this fingering gonna work out, that sort of thing. Um, and then in addition, I'm usually also, well, it depends. I'm either just thinking of the piece as a whole, or I'm thinking of the piece from an educational standpoint and what concepts I want the kids to be able to achieve. So once I have a main melody, maybe written out on or figured out on the piano, I bring that to the computer and I start to figure out what form I want to use, and it kind of comes from there.
So once you've got the architecture set and you're writing and stuff, I'm sure like most educational composers, you're looking at the each line based on grade level and what the students can and cannot do and how to keep everybody interested.
Hmm.
I'm sure we
Especially those
all.
lower strings, right?
Yeah, exactly. We all do that. How do you know when you're done? How do you know when you feel like, wow, this is it?
That is the hardest question. I've talked to a lot of composers, and that's our one tricky thing. Um, it can be a couple things. Sometimes I just get a piece done, and it's like done in a week or a weekend, and it's just, oh, this is it, and it's there. But sometimes I start something and I put it away for months and take it out maybe a year later and play back around with it. Um, I feel like sometimes there's that automatic just aha, like this works. I do like checking with other people. My husband is a band director, so I'll have him listen to it and see what he hears versus what I've heard the whole time in my head. And or other orchestra directors to see it. Would you play this with your kids, and what aspects do you like about it?
How do you so I'm relating to that answer because I have a friend that kind of serves as a sounding board for me on many things that I write. And how do you deal with criticism when you get that ultimate? Because the two people that listen to my music most often is this friend of mine and
Right.
my wife, and then my kids. But when your wife tells you, I don't think that works, it's not always easy. So how do you handle that
I'd
when it's
say I'm
critical?
probably most direct with my husband, and I'll say, "Oh, too bad." But honestly, it takes me a couple times. Like if he says it, I'll need to like kind of ignore it the first time and then go back maybe a day or two later and say, all right, let me try what he said and see if it works, and try to hear it from that different voice. And we've kind of learned there's certain things that I like to do in my music and certain things he likes me to do in my music, and sometimes they don't vibe. So no, that is hard. And I've also had editors that have said, "Oh, you need to change this one part," and you just don't want to because you're like, "Oh, it's finished, it's done, it's my baby," right?
Right.
And then, but I've had experiences where they've pushed me and it's gotten me the piece to a better place in the end. I have to be
Yeah.
open to that to an extent while still holding my own integrity.
Right.
But yes, it's
Exactly.
a challenge.
So do you ever have the experience? At least this happens to me all the time, where I'm writing something and I suddenly get really paranoid that I'm ripping this off from somebody, and I have to think about, wait a minute, where have I heard this before? Is this that? Do you ever have that experience at all?
Yes, and also just ripping off from myself.
Yes.
Yes, and interestingly enough, the person who picks up on that the most is my son. He's 7 year old, and he just has a memory like a trap when it comes to music. I remember the first time, a few years ago, he was singing something. I'm like, "What are you singing?" And he's like, "Mommy, it's your piece." And it was a piece I had been working on, and so that was a pretty fun moment. But yes, I do get paranoid with that because I mean, there is somewhat of a limitation when you're dealing with the educational world with how far you can go range wise or structure. So sometimes I have to be a little careful with that.
So, especially in this challenging time we're in, with COVID and people teaching virtually and asynchronously and synchronously in every way possible. I know people are pretty stressed out, and it's been very, very challenging for people, and so on and so forth. But even in a normal year, a regular year where we weren't dealing with all this, there's always a challenge for music teachers. That whole work-life balance, and you have a family, and you have this big job, and then you also have plus you're trying to be a composer and a writer and clinician and so on and so forth. How do you manage your work-life balance, and how do you sort of what are the filters you use? How do you decide how much to do, not to do, and how do you keep yourself sane?
Hmm. That has definitely changed over the years. I remember when I in my first job, I spoke with the outgoing orchestra director, and she said that her rule was at 4:30 she shut everything down no matter what. And I started teaching. I was like, how does she do that? That's not possible. Like,
Yeah.
I'm working all hours late in the night, and we get so involved in all these things we're doing. I had another teacher, kind of a resource teacher, that suggested that, you know, we don't have to do everything. I live in an area where people are so involved in doing so many things. The kids are involved in sports and their families and their neighborhood things, and just it just goes on and on and on. The list never ends of all of what they do. And yes, I want to provide them with the most enriching experiences, but that doesn't mean there has to be one every month. you know so I've learned to kind of pick and choose what those experiences are and those events are. um, and I've also learned to delegate things. Students in orchestra love to help out. So if you're working on creating a virtual ensemble, don't feel like it's all on you. Maybe the kids want to be involved in actually, editing the videos and putting them together. You might just find that there's somebody that, whether they need community service hours or not, just likes to do that. And then they have a little bit more sense of, pride in the work that they do and share that with the other students.
Yeah, I had a saying that I always used to use: never do anything a student can do, for the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to kind of do one last question here, if you could, and I know this is a really hard one, if you could look back at your catalog and all the things you've written, what are two or three pieces that you just really feel good, proud about and feel like are going to stand the test of time, and you feel like, wow, that was really great work, and people should know these pieces. They should know
Mm-hmm.
these two or three pieces. What would they be?
Um, I think I'm gonna start with Midnight Howl. Even though it's kind of specific towards the Halloweeny kind of time frame. I mean, you could do it other times a year, I suppose, but I just really like how that was a piece that just came together in a weekend. I literally wrote it in a weekend, and that Monday we had a in service, and I asked the orchestra or the orchestra teachers to play it, and everybody seemed to click into it. Um, I, I've used that with my advanced middle school orchestra, and I'd say that was in the fall, and that was the best year I've ever had with that orchestra, just because it really taught them bow control together, and that was a really great way to start off the year. Um, and then Sky Suite is something that I'm really proud of, and I think it's really become a method book within the context of a piece. I've now used it pretty much every year with my incoming students. I have kids coming from about 8 or 9 elementary schools, so they're all coming from different backgrounds of levels of music reading. And so I found that that piece can help bring us together, get everybody on the same page, note reading wise, bowing wise, understanding the basics of the instrument. So that's been really cool. So I'd say those are the two
Yeah.
that
Well, I
I.
can certainly echo Sky Suite because I was actually the editor that chose that one. So I know that one very well. That's a great piece. Well, Katie, thank you so much for meeting with us today. And I just want to encourage all the teachers out there, if you, for one reason or another, don't know Katie's work intimately well, you should certainly get on Pepper and listen. It's terrific work, wonderful music. She's a terrific composer, but also a really great teacher. And I find often those two go together. That when you're a really good educational composer, you're probably a really good teacher too, and really understand what the kids need and what will serve the curriculum and all those kinds of things. So thanks a lot for being with us today, and we'll see you out there on the clinic world someplace.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Katie.
Bye.
Bye.